And this is where it all comes together. What this arc has been building up to for 50 episodes. And the filler arc. The true battle against the darkness of Merrick Ishtar. And it's a really slow arc.
And it's because every game of it is 3 or more parts. I'm recapping 26 episodes here, and yet only 5 duels happen.
Not help that every single episode is padded to hell. You could cut an episode from each part of the multi-parters this arc with how much they added flashbacks or superfluous dialogue. Admittedly, it's been between 30 and 70 episodes since much of this dialogue had been spoken, which they then reiterate, but one, if they've been following the show, they would know this, and otherwise such would have been blocked into a recap episode instead of investing in an ongoing story, and two, they often repeat or flash back to the exact same scenes! I think they repeat Isis's original exposition about the God cards 3 times, and the origins of Merrick's Crusade or some aspect of it just as much, if not more.
This all beginning as the airship finally arrives at Alcatraz Island, a former military-industrial complex Seto razed to the ground when he turned the company from war profiteering to gaming technology, to, as said, remove the sin. Likewise, his choice of holding the finals here was, with the goal of winning in sight, to turn what was once a site of incomprehensible shame into one of triumph, and use that as a symbol of his will to move forward and overcome all odds.
Seto, I've got some bad news for you on that front.
Yami Merrick threatens Isis's life, only for her to be spared by the call to disembark for the final round. The choices and opponents chosen by an interim duel were the first 2 out, and the last 2 out will be the other's respective finals opponents in a 4-way battle royale.
And I always liked the idea of this. Multiple people playing against each other at the same time. Not just worrying about one strategy or your own strategy, but the possibility all your opponents could gang up on you to out you all at once, or even save you in exchange for that being returned on a moment-by-moment basis. And sadly, none of the web apps really allow for that kind of game, nor really much of tag dueling outside of Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro. During high school, when I could get to a hobby shop that did free play, I did this with a lot of people. The largest one we did was a 16-person tag match free-for-all, where everyone was screwed over by these 2 guys that near simultaneously played Horus the Black Flame Dragon level 8 and Jinzo. But the ultimate winner of that entire gigantic match was an Exodia deck, because no one was paying attention to the guy that just played defensive monsters and draw cards.
Each of them enters the battle royale with differing goals as to who they want as their opponents in the real semifinals. Atem wanting to honor the fight he promised Jonochi to return his red eyes,
which is a really stupid thing, as they'd only return it if he lost, defeating the entire point of him facing Merrick to end his reign of terror against him.
Seto wanting to face down Atem not just to settle the rivalry in another game, but he's already developed an anti-Ra strategy which requires Osiris to work. Merrick also gunning for Atem so he can settle things and murder the Pharaoh. As for Jonochi, with Mai's condition continuing to deteriorate, Jonochi breaks from the expected strategy needed to break Merrick in leaving him to Atem, and instead aims to face him directly, so that his loss will make his shadow powers falter and release Mai from the punishment game. So, ironically, Jonochi and Seto are aligned in their goals, and find themselves in conflict with both Atem and Merrick.
Once again, this more shows Atem as short-sighted with regards to his goals and dueling practices. But for once, Seto's also misreading the situation, still finding Jonochi's presence in this tournament despite not having the ranking to have gotten in an eyesore.
Thus, instead of getting Merrick out of the way collectively to then feud among themselves for the final pairing, as would be smart since he is the bigger threat, Seto attacks Jonochi first, as part of a bigger scheme to get Atem going after him, which he didn't need to begin with. As a result, Merrick controls the pace of much of the match, with Jonochi being the one that outsmarts the others with his esoteric cards, and getting the match he wanted, and facilitating in turn Seto's own goal. Merrick, expectedly, is not happy, and turns their match into a shadow game almost immediately, choosing to refrain from any additional effect beyond intensifying the pain of the damage Jonochi takes.
そいつの精神と肉体はゆっくりゆっくり永遠の苦痛とともに死の世界に落ちてゆく。いいな、情のうち。もうじきそれを味わえるんだぜ。
And as Yami Merrick's deck specializes in torturing his opponents, you can all easily tell where this is going.
Mai, お前こんなに痛い思いをさせられたんだな。待ってろ、マイ。俺がお前の借りを返してやるぜ。
But in tandem with Merrick's Hell Poema robbing him of cards he can play every turn,
And that being a card I'm amazed never saw more use, because at any point in the game, that kind of effect is freaking devastating. You know, that's probably because it's difficult to search and needs to be destroyed in the field before its effect can work.
he ends up at a massive disadvantage. Nightmare Wheel, another torture card used in this duel, has also been a particular favorite of mine from time to time, but Merrick's strategy begins to unravel once more with gambling cards with Jonoji's card quiz, or question as it's known here, making Merrick answer, "What's the first monster in Jonoji's graveyard?"
わからねえよな。そりゃそうだ。なぜならよ、ヘルポエマーがランダムに選んだ捨て札をお前は知らないからだ。
And with it, Jonoji gets Psycho Shocker, momentarily giving him an edge that is lost when Merrick sacrifices his monsters to give him Lava Golem, a 3000 attack point monster that inflicts 1000 damage to its controller every turn, and which Merrick then prevents from attacking.
Lava Golem's another old favorite of mine, kind of for the same sadism seen here and in the live duels I do with my friends, where I'd give it to my opponent, then lock them from fighting with Swords of Revealing Light for a few turns, then double the injury to their pride by taking it back with my Relinquished. Yes, I've always been kind of evil. I kind of would pull the same thing with Grinder Golem late in GX's run, and now I run a Relinquished deck that still does this, only with the Kaiju monsters, to show that isn't exactly a strategy that has gone away, nor was it a new thing in the slightest.
But with the Shadow game in play, the heat of its body is real, and the burn and torture effect continues to take its toll. However, in a 2-card play, Jonoji is able to clear the board once more, and in doing so, summons a as-of-before unseen super monster of his, Guilford the Lightning, which, if summoned through 3 tributes, can blow up the field.
Beast King Barbaros is better. Stronger and more effects for the same ability.
But that only forces Merrick to summon Ra. With it, he incinerates Guilford, and thanks to the Shadow game, Jonoji feels every lick of those immortal flames.
I'm kind of baffled 4Kids actually didn't censor this. Being burned to death is one of the absolute most horrific ways to die. Well, they didn't have Joey screaming throughout it, and they did cut it down a bit, but it's again in contradiction to their mission statement, especially with a lot of the more objectively stupid things they did change. Hell, they censored Lava Golem, and Lava Golem had far less necessity to censor.
It's probably because, to everyone's surprise, Jonoji actually survived the Divine Flames through sheer force of will, once again in defiance of the seemingly omnipotent might and wrath of Ra.
神の攻撃を城之内の精神力が上回ったとでも言うのか。
However, this is the end for him. Before he can call an attack with his drawn monster to win with Gearfried, his body gives out, and he collapses, losing on the technicality of death.
城之内のやつ息してないぜ。城之内。ちょっと起きて起きてよ城之内。お兄ちゃん返事してお兄ちゃん。
Oi! Moron! There's a little thing called CPR. They teach it in middle school. If you're waiting for the medics, maybe you should try assisting in getting him breathing again.
No, you can't do that, as that would mean someone would be locking lips with him. It's that kind of real-world logic that intervenes on this scene that otherwise is pretty damn impactful, that everyone shows a bit of remorse for, and it's not made any better with how they cut Jonoji's temporary death from the dub.
城之内よ、貴様のチリざま、最後にデュエリストとして認めてやる。
And something not seen from Seto in the dub as a result of that cut.
And at least for those succeeding to challenge Merrick, they've seen everything he has. Seto has confirmed his strategy, and all that is needed to beat Ra. Seto gives Atem the time to compose himself before their game, as Jonoji is saved from the edge of death by Seto's medical team. Jonoji once again, in 3 days, forced into a mental realm intended to wake him up from a debilitated state.
Why did they keep doing that with him in this arc? First during his brainwashing, then the aftermath of Rashid's duel, and now here. It's not even a kick the poppy kind of thing, as there's only so much drama you can pull out from playing the exact same card. And I gotta warn you, you're limited to 3 in a deck. Kind of why this didn't invoke drama when they did this again with him in Doma. They'd overused it as it is.
Not help that these are all, once again, pointless filler drawing out to something that should have been much shorter and more focused. Though thanks to the Millennium Talk, Atem learns that Jonochi will pull through, leaving him ready for the 6-part match with Seto.
And it's only 6 parts due to the Jonochi's in his dream world filler, which adds about an episode and a half of padding. You know, as long as the Pegasus duel went on for, at least other story-relevant things were happening. And in the later series where they had longer duels, they made better use of their runtime.
And this 6-parter could not be different content-wise from what 4Kids turned it into, as once more it's a battle of ideals between the two, starting from words over Jonochi's fate and how they view him from their own perspective. Seto, respectful in his mannerisms towards Atem's fallen friend, which Atem with every detail takes the wrong way. The 4Kids version was about fate, magic, destiny, and all such crap, inferring Atem needed Seto's help to save the world, but as I've said before about this, the world itself was not on the line. The world-ending cataclysm in the 4Kids version of things at the time was a 100% red herring and made up, as they turned the Egyptian god cards into keys that could save the world from a calamity or destroy it outright, instead of them being personal keys to Atem's memories and the authority as pharaoh, removing how personal and intimate the stakes were.
And as a result, they did more and more wrong by Seto as this conflict played out by him being indifferent to the world's potential end, even though the world is where he keeps all of his stuff.
And of course, they removed dialogue that explained away how the hell Seto and Atem kept playing magic cards on each other's turns without them being quick play spell cards. Which, you know, in the dub was a massive, massive plot hole.
I activate this card! Well, I activate this card! Then I activate this card! And I activate this card! Activate this card! I activate this! Well, I activate this! And I activate your mama!
How that actually happened was another spell Seto used at the beginning, which allowed them to be used like this, similar to how Temple of the Kings did the same with trap cards. Thus, the early side of the duel is a race against time to one-up each other, and again the sacrifices needed to bring forth the battle of their respective gods, each countering and upstaging the other as expected of two rivals like this, who know each other's strategies and yet are thinking alike in their goals. This duel gives us several new monsters we'd not been given sight of before, but came to be used a lot in years past it, though admittedly one more than the other. Seto's XYZ monsters were a pretty effective and supported set of machines for a while, even without a mass revival ability. And Atem's Solitaire Knights admittedly only got usable once their fusion monster Arcana Knight Joker was eventually released. But for someone running all warriors, their swarm strategy could be well supported with warrior monsters' usual gambit of equip cards and attack enhancement.
I like to equip Queen's Knight with Magnum Shield, even though Magnum Shield only came out during Zell. But a 3000 plus attack point monster is a good battle guard while waiting to summon the other pieces for Arcana.
But even as the gods are summoned, the back and forth continues, as Yugi's limited by the need to keep Osiris' attack points higher than obelisks, while Seto has more freedom and counter cards to play. But, of course, Seto's tactics are once more made fruitless, as Obelisk's ability is rendered moot in the face of the bullshit Duke's Ex Machina of Karibos.
One of these days, you're going to learn how Karibo's effect actually works, Atem.
And you know, I wouldn't even really have a problem with it this time if it weren't for Seto entirely playing the duel without an effect that actually cheats with how its effect is used wrong. And this is supposed to be the grand, final climax to their conflict with a clean, masterful, ultimate, and definitive win for one or the other.
ロード・オブ・ドラゴンがこの笛を吹くとき、手札の中にあるドラゴン族を2体までフィールドに召喚することができる。ドラゴンを呼ぶ笛の効果は手札にあるドラゴン族を特殊召喚させる。 だがその効果はお前の手札だけに発動するわけじゃない。
But instead, every single one has an asterisk beside Atem's victory, by him using something in a way that the series has already established doesn't work that way. You know, the only worst offender of that to date is Yuma and Zell. We really shouldn't be seeing this at this point, as it undersells the entire argument Atem is trying to make against Seto's conduct if he can't actually beat him without cheating.
The clashing of gods gives them both another vision of their ancient conflict, one that, again, differs from how that was all previously presented.
And it's not the last.
Though again, to show the difference from Dub, Seto takes this vision to mean the same thing Atem does, that their rivalry in the modern era is just an extension of one that has transcended time itself. Seto, of course, believing this score must be settled so it can finally be put behind them. They now both discard the god cards as their role has been served, but at this point their decks really need to be running on fumes by how much they've discarded, drawn, and used card effects up to this point.
The fact they should only have 40 cards to use seems a bit forgotten among all the card effects the pair have cycled through, at least 20 cards each having been either played or burned.
But as the two sides' monsters return to the Dragon of White and the Magician of Black, it finally comes down to the core of Seto's insistence on facing Atem, and how this tournament has opened his eyes to why this can't continue.
過去を追い求める者に光はない。未来に背を向け、過去へと敗北へと続くロードを歩むがいい。それは貴様への復讐などという単純な枠に収まるものなどではない。俺がなぜ貴様との戦いに執着したか、俺もその答えを求めこのバトルシティを戦ってきた。全てあの石板が発端となり幕を開けた。そこに答えは記されていたのだ。貴様はあの石板に記された記憶とやらを追い求め戦ってきた。それは過ぎ去った戻らない時間を過去を追い求める愚かな行為でしかない。だが俺は違う。俺の過去には憎しみと怒りしか存在しない。貴様のくだらん幻想などとは違うのだ。俺は未来にしか興味はない。遊戯、貴様は過去の象徴なのだ。それを粉砕することが俺の未来を輝かしいものにする。
The only way he can surpass himself and his malicious desires is if there's nothing left behind the regrets. And sadly, this is not that day. For Atem doesn't understand what's needed to banish the negative emotions he uses to drive him forward. But this is all weakened by it being phrased in the terms of anger and hatred being behind his drive. And that's wrong as, well, that malevolence in his heart has been driven out by Atem's original penalty game, and in some ways conflict with what Seto has gone through to regain his own heart and soul.
Especially egregious as, well, it was a filler arc. The virtual world did show why Seto was the way he was. The hatred and anger within him is self-loathing. That's not something you can banish by defeating someone who bears it. That only drives it deeper. It's why winning would state it in full contradiction to Atem's declarations, as it would be a sign he has surpassed his own weakness by overcoming this insurmountable obstacle, because he'd have an achievement to take pride in again.
But this also feeds back into the Nietzschean philosophy perspective I presented in my initial breakdown of his character in the Duelist Kingdom video. While the evil of his soul was driven out, his perspective of the hardships which caused him to be like that has not changed. He doesn't want to forget it as Atem thinks he does. He wants to not be haunted by it anymore. And someone chasing the past like Atem is simply an existence he cannot understand.
At least again until the Dome arc, where they finally make Atem confront this entire thing to show how hypocritical his words actually were. I'm missing how the narrative fixing ended up so despised because of how the entire series has been altered.
And this brings to a head the same thing Seto himself has said. This cannot continue as it is. He cannot continue with this obsession, as it is restraining and throttling him. And with that philosophy, he believes it will end if he can conquer this challenge. Atem doesn't see that, only seeing this as a cycle of hatred, when this fixation was born in the modern era as a remnant of a goal to be surpassed once Seto reassembled himself, only to continue on in how he interacted with the world the same he did before. So this duel is doing something, but it's not destroying Seto's hatred. It's showing him the stagnation preventing him from moving forward is self-inflicted, restrained by his own beliefs, and unable to conceptualize the things that motivate others, or see them as just as valid. Which only begins to be recognized and changed when Jonouchi challenges him to decide who placed third in the overall tournament, as Jonouchi has woken up, and it's suddenly as if he was never at death's door.
Something never once explained in the series, though my personal perspective is by force of will he threw off the magic of the penalty game Merrick inflicted upon him that left him like that. He did say that was going to be the penalty game after all, a state of death and misery. And it would be far from the first time Jonouchi has shown himself to be inherently antithetical to Merrick's mind games.
But this duel is the more important of the two, as Jonouchi himself serves as an exemplar of someone who has grown and surpassed himself by leaps and bounds when given the right conditions. Conditions Seto Kaiba himself has facilitated. And that growth all done through simply determination, lacking the self-loathing in Seto's core, as Jonouchi keeps pace with Seto this time, instead of being utterly overwhelmed as he was the first time they dueled. And moreover, he puts Atem's oblivious friendship speeches in terms Seto can actually understand, equating what's among them doesn't much differ from the bond he shares with Mokuba, which makes such an idea far more palatable to him than a stranger you blindly place trust in, as Atem has ended up spouting that is a concept alien to Seto's life experiences. Granted, that is very much hurt by Jonouchi stealing one of his treasured blue-eyes dragons, which just slams Seto's rage button. So it's only upon later reflection does he seem to see any of that, but it's an impetus I see built upon later, and conceptually, him realizing that his actions facilitated the growth of others beyond themselves may have led to him later founding the dual academies in the sequel series canon, to say nothing of what he was trying to do in Dark Side of Dimensions.
いつか俺はお前に勝つ。その時まで何度だって戦い、負けるたびに這い上がって挑戦し続けてやる。バカは死ななければ治らんらしい。
And yet, isn't that what you keep doing with Atem? Sometimes I think Takahashi wrote Seto to be obstinate just to needlessly keep him at odds with everyone else.
However, as Seto stalks off, Isis makes Seto aware of the last testament seen in his prior life, that his Egyptian self regretted not being there for Atem in his final hours, even as they found themselves on opposite sides, Seto having read those final passages with his ability, and it's finally Mokuba, the only person he trusts, that breaks through to him, to get him to open his closed-off heart.
昔の兄様はゲームを本当に心から楽しんでた。あの頃の兄様の笑顔が俺は大好きだったんだ。そして昔の兄様に戻ってほしいんだ。
俺に憎しみを捨て去ることができようか。奴は言った。友の力が勝利をもたらしたと。ならばわずかばかりの可能性を秘めたこのカード。ユギ、貴様に託している。貴様に奇跡が起こせるか。
Character arc achieved. Wish we'd had that in the dub, where he was still very obstinate about that.
Which brings us to the final duel of the tournament, Seto entrusting Atem with Fiend's Sanctuary as the battle begins.
何か企んでるのか？怪しいぜ。気をつけろ、ユギ。きっと何か裏があるぞ。
Said by the people who keep giving him the friendship speeches that want to make him act like this, with this being an example of their browbeat message being acknowledged.
Merrick instantly turns this into a shadow game, with the souls of their other selves placed on the line. But because of the bond they share, Yugi vanishing will cause Atem to die with him, whereas this consequence is not present amidst Merrick's darkness and light sides. Merrick's deck this time becomes all about abusing revival and life gain effects as shortcuts to summoning Ra at its strongest again and again, building a defensive wall to protect him every time it returns to the grave, but it's a sharp departure from his previous torture and burn tactics that nonetheless feel like an oddity among everything, as one expected that when facing Atem, that the entire point of why he used such strategies would be at their most vile.
But no, it's just rah rah rah. Where's the sadism we've come to associate with Merrick here?
But, in the most legit top-decking moves Atem's ever used...
Well, okay, to be fair, I've had a lot of games where the exact best card to counter what my opponent's doing is pulled like that.
He draws Fiend's Sanctuary, and counters Ra's Life Drain one-turn kill.
I love Fiend's Sanctuary, by the way, as it reflects all damage it would have taken, but is more used for a free sacrifice, and it makes sense for it to be a card Seto would use since most of his monsters are high in level.
But we've got Deus Ex Machina preventing a showcasing of a win condition here through Defusion being used to end the merger of Merrick with Ra, which is not at all how Defusion works, as he didn't actually fuse with it.
And that move irritates the hell out of me because I played an Upper Deck official using a special event Raw deck at Gen Con in the 2000s, and he pulled that bullshit to avoid my counter to the one-turn kill. I would have won the next turn with my Horus level 8, damn it!
The duel really should have ended here unless Merrick could use some other attack drain and life gain effect like, say, Mystic Walk. And I say that of the Upper Deck official that cheated me out of that win too. But Atem then uses the token as Seto would, cloning it to then summon Obelisk to inflict massive damage. Godmaster Punch! Though that too ends up backfiring due to Merrick's creation of the God Slime using Metal Reflect Slime. Another card I really like since I really like trap monsters, and that thing's defense is massive. But it ends up getting beaten by a card destruction effect, Atem likely included after their first encounter, where he entirely lacked such, leading the way to another exchange of gods, where they all fall, ending the match with Atem using every monster in his deck as a final strike to end Ra for good. I gotta admit, the imagery here of an entire army of monsters uniting as one force to take down an immortal god is amazingly intimidating, and I think only matched to date by Divine Neos in GX and Clustering Wishes in 5Ds. With this final end to Ra weakening his dark half, and Rashid awakening from his coma to help strengthen the true Merrick, he takes back control of his body and surrenders, finally at peace with himself and the responsibility of his own sins. The penalty of the Shadow Game, exterminating the hatred within his own soul. He's free. In a way, has achieved the goal of freeing his family as well. With it, Yugi is named victor of the Battle City tournament, Ra turned over to him, as are the Millennium Rod and Ring. The punishment games Merrick's dark side inflicted on the others all released, and shown the markings on Merrick's back to lead him to the keys to Atem's memories. With the tournament concluded, Seto sets the entirety of Alcatraz to blow, having come to a decision himself. To truly move beyond his past, and the specter of his nightmares, it can't simply be won or buried under a monument to another's success. It has to be earned.
俺の心に救うゴーザブローの怨念との戦いでもあった。この俺の前に立ちはだかった。それで俺は奴に打ち勝つことができたのか。この先、俺が進むべきロード。
And thus, Seto is going to dedicate everything he has now back to the dream of his childhood.
Which is what he was working on before Isis tricked him into putting this entire tournament together, meaning this feels like circular logic and Isis sabotaging his own personal apotheosis.
And that is to build a world where everyone can find happiness, through the proxy of the amusement parks like Kaiba Land, in pursuit of the smile he himself lost. But this time, a little wiser to the value of what brings one joy.
瓦礫の底に眠る俺のロード
And he does it in a jetliner stylized after his Blue Eyes Dragons. Because that is just how Seto Kaiba rolls. And with that, they head off to America to make their dream a reality.
いずれ貴様らも招待してやる恋場行くぞ木馬
アメリカに向けて出発。
Everyone says their goodbyes upon reaching Domino, Mai still showing the lingering specter of her experiences upon her as she parts from Jonochi, finding there's no reason to stay here.
私にはあんたたちの友情がちょっと眩しかったのよ。
However, there is one final thing to conclude, as the final match of the Battle City tournament. For Yugi, promised Jonochi a duel for the chance to win back his Red Eyes. And by Ra, since he should have won against Merrick had it not been for the Shadow Game, he's going to give it to him. And by the fact that Jonochi has his Red Eyes back past this, you can all draw the same conclusion that in the face of this challenge, against a deck bearing the God cards, Jonochi won.
Battle City is the best arc the original series storytelling-wise had to give.
The main trio of Atem, Jonochi, and Seto all develop and show the inner strength of their true selves, Seto more in the virtual world arc due to how much Takahashi tended to railroad him into the role of jackass. Merrick's stakes are all built off of a legitimate grievance motivated by a hidden sin, and the road to its revelation and absolution is ultimately interesting and only ever hurt by the dub-based changes that made him into a by-the-book generic evil that you didn't really see or feel empathy for. The problems of the arc, as I've said, come down simply to the poor use of the supporting characters and the worsening pace of things as things go on in the basis of the adaptation, when they had things to work with by that given time and the cast they did have. And many of the card effects, at a point where they shouldn't be doing this anymore, as was the big criticism against the Duelist Kingdom arc, working differently than they're supposed to. And not just in the not as the real card effect says it should way, but in ones that conflict with said card's effects prior utilization. That deeply weakens the drama of things when you don't know how someone is going to get out of a situation, and then the opponent hands them that solution like that, when their own things would have done that regardless.
It's like, you often could not get farther from the proper effect at this point, and not just in Kazuki Takahashi's usual screwing of the rules for narrative whiplash, since you can kind of see him having issue with writing a few of these at this point, which is probably why he would move to wrap the entire series and become a creative consultant and character designer for the franchise with its sequels. Though that may have been because he began to fall ill from fatigue near the end of writing his scripting of this arc, which would more affect the Memory World arc, and the general issue of writer's block which happens when you try and pump out a weekly series with no buffer and no advanced planning, since Kazuki Takahashi is also admitted to procrastinating a lot on the development of his ideas.
Still, with the strength and character and the carrying of the core messages of people's bonds giving individuals strength through the greatest of challenges, this arc is still for the most part a massive win.
The next time we return to this card game obsessed series, however, we will be moving farther off the canon beaten path. And not just because Doma's an anime filler arc. For around this point in the storyline of the series, 4K tried to bank on the popularity of it with an original movie they came up with themselves and hired Studio Gallop to make. And it's pretty popularly derided, despite Kazuki Takahashi then taking ideas from it for Dark Side of Dimensions. And I will try and explain why it's disliked when we get to it.